Mega Man, Jimmy Easy. Come on.
Welcome to Advocacy Help Desk, a network of advocacy leaders sharing best practices and new ideas via this free podcast to help everyone in government affairs get better at their advocacy craft and having a lot of fun while doing it. Now to today's great show.
All right, folks, welcome back. Advocacy Help Desk. We're going to jump right into it today. There's so much going on in our industry, in our world of advocacy. We've got fences up at the Capitol. We're still doing virtual. We're still texting to try to get our message across to staff and members, which in some way feels like a middle school teenager, falling in and out of love. Hopefully they text us back. We'll see. Waiting. So as challenging as it is, there's also these huge opportunities in virtual to expand how many people we get involved and expand our reach on Capitol Hill. So it's difficult, it's harder work, but in some ways it's more meaningful work. That's what I keep telling people is the harder this stuff is, the more meaningful it is, because it's only going to make us better and sharper coming out of this when we can actually go back in to see people in person and see each other at happy hours. So the focus as we kind of, continue on our journey in 2021 is to talk to leaders in the space and have their viewpoint shared, so that I always think, Brian, if I can hear somebody's viewpoint, which is probably a little bit different than mine, we're all working on the same stuff, in the same ways, but people have different ideas about how to do it, and they're doing it in different ways. And so the show is really about showcasing those ideas so somebody can pick up some nuggets here or there and up their game. So for the help desk, our 1980s neon help desk, who we got on today?
I love it. Thank you, Polk. It's always good to see you. And we'll introduce Nick in just a second. Just quickly, you're spot on, buddy. It's a changing world. It's a changing game. And I'm always excited to talk to new and award-winning voices in this case. Yes, I know. I will let our friend Nicholas DeSarno introduce them. But Nick, it is good to see you. Glad to have you back co-hosting once again. And yes, congratulations again on the advocacy conference. I really, it was not easy. Virtual conferences never are, but it was really great how you timed things right, and the courses were good, and you had different days for different things. And I'll tell you, I had 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 favorite sessions. I won't list them all out because I'm going to get somebody angry at me. But one of them was with our guest today, Becca Steele, and talking about Toyota and all the great work they're doing, the innovation they have, the different ways they engage people. We'll get into all of that. But Nick, if you want to introduce our guest today, please dive in.
Yeah, I'm excited to bring on board Becca Steele, who is the Director of Emerging Technologies at Toyota. And she's also in charge of their digital advocacy program. So she's kind of dual-hatted there, right? She's a lobbyist dealing with some of the coolest stuff policy-wise that Toyota is dealing with, right? Like self-driving cars and all of that great fun, which Toyota is a leader in. And hopefully those technologies will be coming to us soon. So I don't have to worry about driving when I get back to the US and worrying about which side of the road I'm on. But she also helps lead their digital advocacy program, and they're fairly advanced in this, and that's one of the reasons why they won an Advocacy Innovation Award. And what I think is about cool, give you a little background about the Innovation Awards is they're not about who ran the best advocacy program or who had the best lobbying campaign, but really about who has moved kind of the profession forward. And so Toyota has won, I want to say, like 3 of them in the last 10 years. They were one of the first organizations to launch a podcast specifically related to government affairs. And
they beat out FDRA that year, who was also a finalist. So here we are with the top 2 podcasters.
On a podcast, very inception.
Yeah, and we're in a podcast. I know, this is great. And I think they have 3 podcasts actually geared towards different policy audiences. And so they've done a great job of that. And what they kind of won this year for, in part was through, using gamification for their grassroots program. There's some other things that they worked on as well. And so with that, I just kind of want to turn it over to Becca and have you introduce yourself. I know you came from the Hill. If you want to just give us a little short background about kind of what led you into politics and then into Toyota's government affairs office.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Brian. It's good to be with you all today. Always a fun way to start a Friday. Thanks for the inflationary introduction. I've been with Toyota for 3 years now, and prior to that, I was on Capitol Hill for over 5 years. I worked for Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. He is now the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, so I got to work on a lot of fun different issues with him. I was in his communication shop and was his digital director. So I really was one of the first digital directors in the Senate. And figuring out how do we use social media and digital to connect with our constituents in a very, dynamic world that was changing, day to day. And then I also helped on his campaign side as well. So some experience with campaign fundraising, email fundraising, and more of the paid side of stuff. Because the fun part about being on the Hill, the official side, you can't spend any money on social media. So you get to get really creative, which has actually really helped me in my role that I have now at Toyota. So that's my background, and really excited to be here with you guys today.
That's fantastic. Look, we love talking to folks in the advocacy space, and it's always fun and great for our listeners to hear about how folks got to where they are and what they're sort of doing now. So it's not always a Hill background. It's nice to have, but some of us got into advocacy in different ways in different places. Let's dive right in. I really want to touch on what you talked about at the conference, right? Which was not just the gamification piece, and we'll get to that, but it's more of how you engage and just talk about the issues with your folks. You had a great sort of 3 words say, I'll let you dive into what those sort of 3 big words are, but I felt that it was great for internal messaging, external messaging, getting people on the same page, getting people motivated, getting people moving. Talk to us a little bit about how you do that at Toyota. Like, what is sort of the baseline plan for what you guys are doing over there?
Sure. Yeah. So to not leave it lingering too long, the 3 words of our framework are activate, educate, and motivate. But they really underpin what we're trying to do at Toyota Government Affairs, which is build a community of grassroots and really have a culture of grassroots within the company and within our suppliers and our dealers. So we have it in the bloodstream. So when you need to call on people or you need to switch things up because there's a pandemic and you're now doing things in a virtual world, you have this community that trusts you and that's willing to engage. So really that culture of advocacy and of grassroots is what we're trying to foster every day at Toyota, whether it's from a lobbying perspective, right, and making sure that we are communicating what we're doing to our advocates, or just appreciating what our advocates do for us and understanding, what they may need to learn about in order to be effective advocates. So I can dive more into the framework if you think that'd be of interest to the audience. I can talk more about how we're set up at Toyota. Kind of what do you?
I think all of those things. I love the culture of and community of grassroots part. I love the communicating and appreciate. You've hit on a lot of the topics that we talk about on the podcast of like making sure you communicate properly, making sure you appreciate properly, making sure you let them know what's going on. Nick, I can see you forming a question over there.
Yeah, I think so this is interesting because when we look at corporate grassroots, there's probably maybe 15 companies that I think do it to the level of like what Toyota is trying to do, and maybe Toyota might be kind of the leader of that pack in some ways. And then there's a lot of companies that just kind of have it as an add-on to their PAC program. And like, it just checks a box of like, yeah, we do like 2 action alerts a year. We don't really ever educate them. It's really only when the lobbyists reach out to us and they're like, we need this to get, passed, or there's a really bad provision that just got put into, this California Senate bill. And so we need all of our employees there to activate, right? And it's like, oh, that's how they think about grassroots. Especially kind of in the corporate world. And I think in associations are a little bit more advanced and take a little bit, they have members, so it's a little bit different of how they engage. But I guess, Becca, kind of talk about the different kind of groups you work with in Toyota. And I know it's not just you doing grassroots there as well. And talk a little bit how it's set up. And then and kind of who you're engaging with and how often you're engaging with them, and what do you really provide to your employees or to your suppliers and folks like that?
Sure. Yes. So first of all, it takes a team and it takes a village. And by that, I mean everyone who's in government affairs, but also everyone who's not in government affairs that gives us support, right? We are dependent on our stakeholders within the company and outside of the company being willing to engage, whether it's on grassroots or, hey, I have a really complicated policy issue. Can you take time out of your really busy day and explain to me what we're working on, right? So it's all about how you communicate with those stakeholders. So within our grassroots kind of department here within advocacy, I oversee the digital advocacy part. We have a fantastic colleague, Donna Rudy, who runs Policy Drivers, which is our employee grassroots program. It is wholly opt-in. We have about 9,000 policy drivers that are part of that. And then we also engage other stakeholders that aren't Toyota employees. We have our dealers who, as most people know, are not Toyota employees, but sometimes it's a little different. They're in a dealer advocacy network. And then we have our suppliers who are in a supplier advocacy network. And we have two folks who are essentially on loan to us from purchasing for the suppliers and then from our sales arm to manage the dealers. So it's really been a collaborative effort, and it's a fantastic way to be able to reach different stakeholders effectively because you have people from that world sharing with you how to reach them. I've never been in the field working with dealers. I don't know that they're very text oriented or that they might have 4 different emails because they have many different dealerships. So things like that, it's really helpful to have people who understand who your stakeholders are and have been part of that group. And then, everyone else, it's our lobbying team, right? We all view lobbying at Toyota not as solely Hill or policymaker focused, that grassroots, again, that culture is part of what we do as lobbyists. So it's not an add-on, right? It is a core, like a cornerstone of how we engage in advocacy at Toyota.
Do you have any sort of, so it's look, the collaboration there is fantastic, and it's clear as to why you guys win the awards and do so much in that forward thinking, because you have everybody sort of on the same page. To Nick's point, that doesn't happen as often as we'd all like. Do you have any advice or any ideas of how folks can get that collaboration together, or just make the first step towards it, or anything to be more like Toyota, but like get there, right?
I think it starts with everyone being on the same page with how important grassroots is. And you can do that. Yeah, right. It's so important. And you can do that, I think, by if you're an advocacy or grassroots person, looking at your program and saying, this is who we have in it. This is where they're located. These are the constituent stories. And it's all about the story. As a lobbyist, when I go onto the Hill, they say, that's really nice. You live in Washington, D.C. I understand that you're telling me Toyota's story, but it's so much more powerful when you have an employee that's back in the district that can tell that story, and it's their story, right? I don't tell my story of a lobbyist in DC. That's not what I'm doing for Toyota. That doesn't help our company and help our employees, right? So it should be the people that are making the cars and that are, protecting. I work on cybersecurity issues, right? Protecting our networks, really interesting things like that your grassroots folks are the best position to tell those stories. And so if you're looking to get buy-in and kind of explain the importance of grassroots, I think that approaching it from what would my lobbyists need that would make their meetings go really well, that would make our have more support for our advocacy. And oftentimes that's going to be constituent stories. So bring that value. It's not just I can send 10,000 letters to the Hill on your bill. That's great. And that's really important. But it's also, I have this one person who has this really interesting story. Let's figure out how to plug them in. And then when you build value on that, you kind of get more understanding of what grassroots can do for the whole organization.
I love that. Andy, looking at you for the podcast side of things, I know that you've done a great job breaking down the issues into the FDRA Shoe and Show podcast and bringing the different people on. Segueing over to Toyota's podcast, but how do you, tell us the success you've had with that? Because I want to, touch on that. Messaging isn't one thing, right? And as you said, it's not just 10,000 letters to the hill. It's stories, it's letters, it's phone calls, it's tweets, it's videos, it's everything to get people to tell a story. Tell us how the podcast sort of tells FDRA's story, how you got into it, and what you've seen really succeed just in that storytelling kind of concept.
I think there's the value play in and not just talking all the time about government relations stuff, right? If you've only got it where you're sending out 2 blasts to get people to do things, and you've got that siren on there and making demands, and
your drug report siren, right?
Yeah, you're only going to be seen as like the panicked people that only call on them when they need something, right? And yeah, it may influence their job and their paycheck, but you're going to be seen as kind of the crazy person that only shows up when the sky's falling. Who wants to be that person? So our podcast is used to leverage industry leaders to talk about business issues generally, and then bring it back to government relations. And then by having those voices, the listeners, one, get value to hear business trends and issues and challenges and opportunities. But then we get to use those leaders' voices to reinforce the importance of staying involved constantly in our programs. So for us, we used to show up to cocktail parties at footwear events, and you kind of have to work your way into conversations, and you're kind of seen as people who are ancillary to the industry supporting it. The podcast has really changed it to where we have a voice, and when you show up, you're brought into conversations, and I think they appreciate a lot more about what we're doing to strengthen the industry in that way. So I want to go back to the first point about building relationships with our members and our advocates, right? If it's transactional, we're putting up those sirens 2 or 3 times a year, the ability to turn somebody and have a relationship with somebody and call them up and say, Bob, I really need 15 people from your division to send these emails and to get involved, is a lot different than trying to push it out over email or social media and all that stuff. Relationships matter. You have to cultivate those. I think the culture matters. So Rebecca started at the very beginning. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we had Kristen on, and I was making that reference to the fact that so many of us keep painting the house instead of going in and doing the repairs. The repairs and the internal workings are our values and our culture, right? And if we're not working on those things, you can paint the house over and over again, but it's going to keep chipping, right? You're never going to be able to keep. I don't think if people aren't thinking about culture and they're not thinking about the values that we're trying to enact in this space, they're constantly just going to be transactional, and they're not going to move the dial, and they're never going to be innovative. Having a solid foundation of values and culture allow us to do really fun things, really creative things. But if we don't, and we just think it's, we're doing everything that everybody else is doing, how do you think you're going to move the dial in these conversations on the Hill or with your advocates? The other thing is this too, and I'm not any more of this time, but I think people don't, the gamification piece, and I want to get into that because I'm so intrigued, but we treat our advocates like we treat people on Capitol Hill. We have the same language we use. We don't use fun language. We don't consider them as consumers. Like, they go home and watch the news and there's a million ads. And for some reason, we don't use the same language as advertisers or branders use to communicate and connect with them in that way. We use some kind of not everybody obviously, but we use this like very couched language that's very government and like very buttoned up. And I feel like we need to use fun tools and innovative ways to connect with them and reinforce things beyond this government speak we typically get into. So that's what
I want to grab on something that you said right before that too, about the innovation thing. One of the things of why I really enjoy having to it as a member is they ask me very interesting questions. And it's not just like Becca, who has asked me great questions, but like when their head of office in DC, Steve Saccone, and he would, call me and say, hey, we're creating this digital position, which was, then Becca was hired. But, what do they look like at other companies? And he was, he always wanted to go and not just throw up some job description of what kind of a digital advocacy and communications professional would look like, But he really wanted to look at it from like, okay, what's the hole that we're missing here that we can kind of be one of the first in DC, because they have Toyota has a policy communications function there. It's not like they needed that. It was this kind of specific digital role that they wanted to fill there. And every year I kind of get a good question or two from Toyota, because they're always looking to be a little bit more innovative, to do something, not just collect their kind of paycheck. How does that kind of work, Becca, there? And then, like how does, is it top down? Are you, how do you kind of build that, we're going to move this forward and we're going to try something new, and it might not work this year as well, like, permission to fail kind of thing.
Yeah. And it goes back to that culture that you were talking about, right? And so it does come from top down, but not in a way that's like everyone will come up with 4 innovative ideas today, right? But more of a like, let's make this fun, let's make it influential, right? Having fun for fun's sake is nice, but really is not what we're paid to do or what we should be doing as advocacy professionals. But we're having fun in order to influence, right? And to build our community. And so, our head of government affairs that you referenced is very forward looking and really open to creative new ideas, right? And so we kind of have this like innovation never stops, and we always believe in better, right? And you're striving towards that. And there can always be better. There can always be something different and more innovative. So it just becomes this thing where we're not just like wash, rinse, and repeat every year with whether it be like a fly-in or an advocacy program or even gamification. It's how do we switch this up? Because you want to treat people how you want to be treated, right? Like when Andy was talking about this, it was what do you want to see as a consumer? I work in government affairs. I don't want to see another email that's like, please pass HR 435 because it's not important, right? Like, I don't know, like explain to me why it matters, how it matters to my company, or send me something useful when you're not asking me for something, right? And so when we looked at gamification, which was kind of the activate portion of our activate, educate, motivate, last year we had these ninja characters that when people took action, which didn't just have to be contacting a member, it could be watch this video that we put together, listen to this town hall. Did you participate in our virtual Washington week? Great, you get points. We had ninjas that would pop up, and you would get a new ninja with a new move, and it was really fun. But we can't just like do the ninjas again. No one wants to just progress from the bottom ninja again to the top. They've seen it all. So this year we did superheroes. So now you're building your superhero team, and they get new moves. And so we just took it up a notch, right? And it's something that's fun. We're activating, and motivating people. Sorry, this is the motivate part, not the activate part. The motivate part. And it's something that's unexpected, right? It's something that like maybe marketing would do. We, someone had asked a question at the advocacy conference on like, how do you convince people that gamification works? And my response was, look at who's doing it. Major corporations are doing this. I love going into the Starbucks app and seeing my stars. And when you get to like 400, they sparkle. Like that is a meaningless thing for Starbucks, right? It's easy for them to do, but it means something to me. And it's fun and I like doing it. So I think that looking around in your life for inspiration from places that aren't just your like government affairs bubble is really fun and important. And we did just this past last week, we did kind of along with educate, right? We're always trying to educate about our issues or why government affairs is important, or advocacy is important, less government affairs, more advocacy. We did a picture matching game for our advocates. So they could take this quiz where we put up photos of the cabinet nominees and then they could match it with the position, right? And you got points for participating. The points weren't based on how well you did, because let's be honest, like I only knew them all by picture because that's my job. But that's not my advocate's job. So it was really fun to put together. People had fun doing it. You could retake it. You got to see who got right, who got wrong. They got points for doing that. And that just came up from, we like playing like matching games sometimes, or like what else is fun for people to do. And it just built a good community, right? And then we can repurpose that kind of concept for something else. So getting
what
inspiration.
what kind of software are you guys using to kind of build these things?
So we use a software called our digital partner at LG&D. And essentially they just built it in Quorum. So we said, we want to make a matching game. They have a fantastic developer. And he said, all right. And he I don't know, stayed up all night coding and flipped it around and was like, we'll embed this as an iframe in Quorum and routed it. So when you clicked that you finished, it magically clicked the points button to get points in Quorum. So it's just about being creative, and not saying oh, that'd be really hard to do that. There's also we looked at some ready-built things, right? You could use a Survey Monkey. There's free tools online, and it doesn't have to be having someone that knows how to code these things. It's just thinking a little creatively, and then asking around. We asked Quorum, how could we do this? And they're like, well, if you have an iframe, you can do anything. So I think it just is about not limiting yourself and exploring, the feasibility, and it might be easier than you think.
I like the competition among advocates because it allows for an ample amount of crap talking across divisions that reinforce taking action, having fun, building the community up, right? There was some study where it was banter among people facilitate better relationships. If you can actually criticize your friend and make fun of them or joke,
trust, right? It builds trust. And we've done that, and Donna is fantastic at this. We can see by pillar participation in our company, right? So we're the salespeople have X% enrolled in our program, and these people don't have as many. And so, we're a car company. We're inherently competitive, right?
Yeah.
And so if you tell one division, you're not the number one division in terms of enrollment, people get into it. And a lot of times, and back to this community thing, it's explaining what it is. And it's a lot better to hear about what grassroots is from someone in your pillar, your boss that rather than the random policy driver's email that comes into your inbox. So again, those relationships that you talked about, can you call up the VP of whatever department and say, hey, I kind of want to do an enrollment push. We only have this percentage enrolled. What do you think? What do your people like? Would you be willing to send an email with a recruitment link? And so those types of relationships are going to help you build your network. And they may be our people just really aren't on email, but if you send me a quick copy paste, I can text a bunch of people the link or something if they're out in the field. So just listening and building those relationships. And it's fun. I like figuring out how to reach different people in different ways. It makes the job not boring.
I have a more professional development question, right? Becca, when you first started, you were definitely hired more towards the we want to launch. I know one of the first things that you did was launch a Twitter handle for Toyota Policy. And so you can go, if you want to follow them, go to @ToyotaPolicy. Is that right?
Yes, please follow Fridays. I'm dating myself. I'm old. I wear skinny jeans and have a side part. I'm a millennial. I'm old. What can I say?
So go to Toyota Policy on Twitter, and you'll find they have a great fun. You're not going to get any sales oriented content. You're going to get the policy stuff on trade and all that other fun stuff. But one of the things that you've done in your career is you moved from kind of a communications role and a digital role to also doing policy and more relationship government relations. How kind of did you make that jump? And even though you're kind of dual hatted and you're doing a little bit of both, what has digital kind of taught you about being a more relationship lobbyist?
Yes, I love that question, because oftentimes my family was my parents were wait, we thought you ran Twitter, and now you're a lobbyist. Wait, I don't understand. They're very supportive, but it's confusing. And so I feel it's all part of public affairs, and you're driving towards the same goal of influence. And so to kind of start at the beginning, my background was in digital on the Hill. And I had the great fortune of working for a boss who's a self-proclaimed wonk. He loves policy. So I learned how to take really complicated policy issues, write them up in an email, or in, back then it was 140 characters in a tweet. And sometimes links counted as you had to use a bit.ly because it counted as characters, and explain that to people. So it taught me how to really distill complicated issues into something that a layperson could understand. So that's a really good skill to have honed when you become a lobbyist on more complicated issues. And most issues are more complicated than they seem, right? So every issue set, as you delve in, you need to be able to explain complicated items very clearly and concisely. So that really helped. And I think when it was funny, if you read, so the digital title that I came to Toyota under was Digital Advocacy Strategist. And when it got sent around, you know, and I saw it posted, it said, and this person could lobby and be willing to like register to lobby. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like I've been doing some like policy work, you know, I've been doing digital for 5 years, and I kind of helped our tech people like do some policy things because I was interested. And I, again, was in an office where they like allowed that to happen, right? Allowed people to explore their interests, which was really fun and really critical in my professional development. So I was like, I've never seen a role that like marries the digital with like the, oh, and you could also maybe lobby and do policy. So it was awesome. So that was part of the reason why I took it. And then as I did the digital and realized how kind of integrated it could become with lobbying and started helping my then boss on some of these tech policy issues, it evolved into like me expressing interest. I do want to work on the policy things. And I can see a role where I manage our digital advocacy with the support of our grassroots team, you know, our lobbyists, because it's all this. I don't think I could do this if there wasn't a culture of advocacy, right? Because it would be a full-time job just trying to get people to participate in grassroots. But since we have this fantastic foundation, our energies can be spent in much more efficient ways and in useful ways. So that's kind of how I ended up lobbying and managing our digital program. And it's helped me again be a lobbyist because I also think more creatively about how to influence. And in the virtual age, it's been fantastic. I'm not going to meetings on the Hill. So it's how do we communicate? Let's build like one-pagers, let's do Twitter threads, like things that people can just take easily and virtually. So I think that the profession is going to evolve into one where you can't be a lobbyist and not think about how you're doing essentially comms, right? And most communications now is digital. Like when I was on the Hill, people would have like digital communications specialists, right? Like that was a very common title because it was so separate from comms. Right. And now comms includes digital. And then you have digital as a field that has like 75 different, you know, portion or like kind of pillars in it and specializations in it. You can just be an email person, like email production and fundraising is a whole separate field. Like it's just really evolved. So I think that the two marry nicely and you become kind of just an advocacy professional, which is what I say, because it encompasses both the lobbying that I do and the digital advocacy that I oversee.
It's like I built the advocacy conference for folks like you. Previously it used to be called the Grassroots Conference for like 40 years. And I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I might have been 5 years ago now, we changed to the Advocacy Conference and we created our three tracks, which are lobbying, policy communications, and grassroots. And so grassroots was now no longer the kind of title of the conference, but just one of the different tracks that you could take. And my goal was to get people that were either well-rounded like you, or folks that had a grassroots person, had a policy comms person, and had a lobbyist, and all three of them could go, or however many, you know, were in that function, and they could go to different sessions and be like, wow, I can't believe, did you hear what they're doing? Because I do think it's it's
so
convergence.
Important. Yeah.
And you know, like you said, you know, being a communications person, well, the press release that used to, you know, fax or physically send to folks, right, doesn't exist anymore. I mean, even when I was on Capitol Hill, like we got faxes instead.
Oh yeah, we would get reception invites via fax, and then like I was a staff assistant, you'd print it off and be like, the Taco Bell reception is happening tomorrow. Like
yeah, and you know, it's like, and it's a different world, right? And so the skills that you know that you might have needed, you know, 30 years ago, like we're not going to the press club anymore, and you're not hanging out with reporters that do that specific beat. You have to know like where to follow them on Twitter, if they're active on LinkedIn, like if you want to do media relations now, if you want to be a lobbyist, you have to understand so much more about what's going on the internet than what's going on in some of the, like, you know, Capitol Hill club lounges, because those conversations, A, are not taking place as often as they were, and B, it's not necessarily where all the people, where the work is going on, and where those conversations that you want to be involved in. It might be happening on some hashtag related to a policy issue that you're working on. So I think that was a really great point. I know Brian's looking at, he wants to jump in. Brian.
No. You're spot on. You're absolutely spot. It's all on Clubhouse now. No, but that's.
Oh yeah.
I don't have an invite yet, so
I haven't been invited either.
I'm not cool. I'm on Twitter. I have Twitter Spaces, I guess, but I don't.
That's right. That's right. Twitter Spaces. So no, you're spot on. Yes, and
I mean, invite.
I appreciate the change, Nick, that you made from grassroots to advocacy, and Becca, you are sort of that crossover that you know, we like to talk about on this show all the time, is that it is a multidisciplinary thing. You are sort of this social scientist pulling the different levers from the different sides of, you know, messaging versus policy versus community building versus everything. And they're not silos necessarily. That's just, you know, you kind of have to mix them all together in the right way with your corporate culture or your association's culture, right? And so some go more this way, some go more that way, and it's just learning the right thing. So I love the conversation we've had thus far, the culture, the community of the, you know, the don't make it an add-on, it's an active program. We need to be here year round. And a great first session we had was building capacity, right? If you're building for one bill, you're doing it wrong. You should be building for capacity of being able to do it today, tomorrow, and into the future. And so all of these pieces are just fitting right in. What is the innovation that you guys are doing for next year, and how do we get in on it? No, but what's the award winner next year? Come on, what's the secret? What's, you know?
So, well, next year is this year, I guess.
That's
so
true.
What are we going to do in 2021? So we actually just recorded our first episode of we're kind of doing a 2.0 of our podcast. We're gonna I'm not going to reveal the name yet because it hasn't debuted. But we're really excited about it. We're going to be having more external guests on. And kind of tightening them up. We realized that people, we knew this, don't have a lot of time. But so we're going to really keep them like under, 8 minutes, really tight, and just what people need to know. So, and have it be fun conversations that aren't just like, here, we're going to talk about tariffs, right? Like, let's talk about like what you're seeing in the news and how maybe it's a little bit different than like what, we'll talk to people that are on the ground, in the like virtual spaces of the Republican Party, and like, what are they seeing there? What are the Democrats seeing there? Right. So sorry, I should have muted. But I think so that's a fun thing that we're doing. The other thing that we did last year was we called it Virtual Washington Week. And we essentially took a look at what aren't we going to be able to do this year because it's virtual, and not how do we do a diminished version of that, as our head of office likes to say, not just let's Zoomify where we have our 100 people we'd normally invite and now everything's just a Zoom meeting. But what does this free us to do now that we're in a virtual world? And for us, it was, we can invite all of our advocates to participate in something. So we put together Virtual Washington Week, where it ended up being 9 different conversations that people could tune into or watch recorded afterwards, about, we had everyone from like Jonathan Swan talking about what it's like, covering President Trump, and this was prior to the election, right, and what he thought was going to happen, to a head of a trade association having a conversation about the future of our industry, right? So that was a really fun thing, and we had really good engagement. And one of those points where if you listen to your advocates, you're going to make it better the next time around. We sent out an email after and said, we'd love to get your feedback on Virtual Washington Week. There's this Japanese concept called kaizen, which just means continuous improvement, which is like with 2 values at Toyota, core values: respect for people and continuous improvement. So we asked for feedback a lot at Toyota. People gave us great feedback. Some of the sessions were too long. They wanted a compilation video that highlighted, the best of. So we put that together. We're like, that's a great suggestion. Let's like pick the best 3 minutes, or it was 1 minute from everyone, and put it together and send that out. And it had great viewership. And so we realized from this feedback, people were doing this kind of asynchronous tuning in to the Virtual Washington Week. So instead of having to have it all in a week and try to deal with scheduling and everything, we're looking at it now as what is just virtual Washington. And so how do we bring Washington to the advocates throughout the year in these types of conversations? So that's one way that we're kind of improving, and we'll see how it goes. We'll ask for feedback again, see what participation rates are, right? Look at the numbers. So that's kind of how we're continuously improving and kind of innovating and like always believing better. And I'm sure if we have this conversation in November, we'll have thought of something new that we have done throughout the year. We just haven't thought of it yet. So
What was the Japanese word again?
Kaizen.
Kaizen.
Kaizen, I believe.
Okay.
So you use it, like we use it, it's like Google, like, oh, Google is, we're like, how do you Kaizen this, right? That's not the appropriate way to use it, but it's like, how do you improve this? And it makes that culture of continuous improvement, makes it not looking back as like, oh, how did we fail? But like, how can we learn and do this better next time around? And it's everything from like, we don't need to have tech rehearsals with this person because they know what they're doing, to like when we send this type of email out, we thought it was really easy to understand how to get into the conference. It wasn't. So let's like test these with a smaller group before we send to people, and not make assumptions about what people are going to want to hear even, right? Like some sessions that we thought were really interesting maybe didn't have the highest viewership, right? Because we hear from our trade association head, right? We're like, oh yeah, it's great. But there was a lot of interest in that from shout out to trade associations, from our policy driver community. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I
like the way that
we have a cheesier one here. It's not quite that, but don't hate, iterate is what we say. So, but same,
yeah,
right? Like, so, it's all about continuous improvement. And that's your goes back to what you said earlier on the permission to fail side of things, right? Is, it's okay to try new things at Toyota. And if they don't work out, move on to something else that's better, more innovative, whatever it may be, and try a different direction. So
yeah, we do that a lot with but to try to like limit, spending money on things that ultimately don't work, right? We do a lot of pilot programs here.
Yeah.
So I really recommend, if you're looking to pitch a new idea or new concept, start it maybe as a pilot, and come up with like, who are your advocates? And like when we did policy drivers and launched it, I wasn't here for that, Donna was, they piloted it and figured out like, how do people want to engage? How do we communicate with them? Is this going to work? Right. And so pilot everything, if you can, and then you learn and then you improve on it. If you're probably not going to do exactly what you did in the pilot, because you're going to learn something. So highly recommend that as a way to also kind of get your foot in the door of innovation and trying new things, if maybe that is a space that feels a little bit uncomfortable in your organization.
Awesome.
I love it. Andy, take us out. This is a fantastic conversation between superheroes and everything else.
Yeah, when we talk about like innovation, not just in our association, what we're doing in advocacy, but I have to work with companies working on innovations that are trying to implement 3D CAD, like designing shoes on a computer, and how you build culture and ideas around that. And the phrase that everybody uses is fail fast and cheap. You're going to fail up front, and if you know that and build that in, and it's okay to fail fast and cheap is the key thing, then you can figure out the way forward, and figure out the right way to do it. I think, in the future episode, Brian and Nick, maybe we'll get somebody on from a company who does innovations and can talk about how to build an innovation program and platform and think about those things culturally. Building in those things would be really fascinating. I'm thinking of someone that maybe works for UGG or Hoka or Teva over at Decker's Brands, doing some amazing things in that space, even 3D printing shoes and stuff like that. But I think there is a culture to that. I think that's why Toyota ultimately is successful. It's probably why they're the Tom Brady of Nick's award program of, if you have it in your blood and your DNA and your culture, then you're going to keep winning year after year, because you can build different things. You're not going to feel, scared to try something different and fail and go after something else. But I think the conversation has been fascinating today, for a number of reasons, but culturally, gamification, segmenting. So obviously at Toyota, there's different segments, but we should all be thinking about how we segment all our different folks into different buckets. And then what is our language and our pitches to those different people, right? It's really easy to send an email blast. We all do it, but it's really easy to do that. but we got to get to the point where we're actually moving the dial forward, right? We need to make it, into a science from an art in some ways. I'm excited about what's coming in the future. This gamification stuff's fascinating, getting people involved. I love virtual Washington idea because what you're saying is it's not all about making the pitch to the lawmaker. It's just about getting people involved and having fun and educated. And if they wanted to go and do that Hill Zoom meeting, they can do that. If they want to listen to this conversation, this really interesting person, I think the key is for all of us is what can you give them they can't get on CNN? Right? It's like they can get that on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, whatever it is. They can read that in the newspaper. Give them the juicy gossip to get them involved and enjoy it and have that conversation that they're not going to get anywhere else. Right? That's our job, but in a way that they're going to trust us around that and build that audience. So virtual Washington, I think, is great because it relieves the stress of constantly, advocating to the Hill, and it's really reinforcing those ideas and just conversations about how important it is and how fun it is, etc. So, I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about going back in person to where we can actually see people. I already have this idea called Advocacy Buddy, where I'm going to take a gold chain with a iPad and I'm going to have an advocate with me all day long on FaceTime, and we're going to walk meeting to meeting. And I'm going to introduce them where they can come in from Wisconsin and beam directly into a meeting. So
I love that. And I think that that's the type of innovation. I'm serious. You think I think lawmakers and staff are gonna be way more open to say, like, I got this constituent on FaceTime, like they're gonna share their story, right? Like before, if you wanted to have a lawmaker on a Zoom call, they'd be like, I don't know, right? Like you come to me and we do the meeting. And now I think it's open. And just to like a final note on your Tom Brady metaphor, I would argue, and this is because I'm not a Tom Brady or Patriots fan, is that don't be like a Tom Brady, because Tom Brady, he left the Patriots and he won, right? Is it Belichick? Is it Brady? Don't make your program reliant on a Tom Brady. At Toyota, there's no Tom Bradys. We are a team. And when we're building things that are going to outlast any one person, right? And so you want to be the person that helps build something that's going to outlast you. And that's great, right? You want to build something that can function regardless of who's in a certain role. So I would just leave people with that, because, I would not, our program would not be successful if we didn't have this like entire team mindset and effort.
All right, real quick wrap up, because Becca has a Hill appointment right now.
Yep. So I'll wrap it up, folks. Thanks for joining us today for this fascinating conversation. We are constantly trying to help the industry improve, the advocates improve. So I think it was kaizen. Was that what it was? Did I get that right? Boom. So our culture here at Advocacy Help Desk is kaizen, is to help everybody listen to new ideas, new tips, new ways to improve what you're doing, get a little bit better at the game. Go to advocacyhelpdesk.com for a full catalog. Go to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, wherever you want to download content and listen to these fascinating conversations, please do. We're here to help you. Drop us a line on guests you'd like us to interview or topics. But until next time, please be safe. Please wear a mask, double if you need to. 6 feet, go 12 if you need to. And please keep advocating.